think it's important to understand the difference between currency. So currency comes from the word current. Current meaning the same sort of word that we use when we talk about electrical current, movement. And that's what all currency needs to do, is it needs to be able to move quickly. Now, for those of you that buy into the story of crypto, I don't need to sell you on the movement across borders and the advantages of blockchain technology and crypto digital currency. But imagine if that currency was backed by gold, because the world has already seen the potential of blockchain technology. Crypto has already run up tremendously. But imagine if there was a crypto that was backed by gold and supported by the sovereigns, yet still decentralized. What would the power of that be against something like the dollar? It's also about oil. So I'm going to explain that and how that fits into the picture a little bit later, and what all of these BRICS countries have, and how Saudi Arabia fits into the picture as well with regard to oil. South Africa is talking about going on strike. COSATU particularly trying to organize the strike. And the strike is because of inflation. Now, inflation, again, as I said, is not in the government's hands. It's largely driven by oil. And ironically, the AA says that petrol prices are probably going to come down between R2.30 and R2.60. And South Africa kind of has inflation under better control than the rest of the world, certainly than the UK at 10.1% and America at 8.5%. So we've still going to probably see interest rates, but the whole world globally is seeing interest rates except for China. Now, America would like you to believe that China's economy is in a terrible situation, that people are struggling to pay their property loans, they're being kicked out of their houses. They would like you to think that China really cannot cope. But the reality is China has dropped their interest rates. They and Russia were probably the two biggest economic powerhouses leading up to this particular situation. Where we are now, the US has been dependent on other countries like Russia and like Saudi Arabia for firstly natural gas and secondly for oil. Since as early as 1931, there was an agreement that the US had with Saudi Arabia with regard to oil. And Saudi has supplied them with the oil, but now America is self-sufficient. They're producing, say, 19 million barrels of oil a day, and they have the capacity to produce more. They have more than enough natural gas. So petroleum liquids, natural gas, they're almost at a situation where they can start exporting. So America is self-sufficient. It's feeling confident with regard to the oil it's sitting on. But the important thing is Saudi Arabia doesn't need to export to America anymore if America is now self-sufficient. And this agreement that Saudi Arabia has had, so Saudi Arabia produces about 11% of the world's oil, and Russia produces approximately 11%. The two together are more than the US. And Saudi Arabia control OPEC. There's basically two oil cartels, for want of a better word. And nothing at all will stop Saudi Arabia from joining a coalition BRICS environment. Already, Iran, another producer of oil, has indicated that they would like to tie up with BRICS. So it'd be interesting to see how things develop. There's definitely a shift in the global world empire, and one needs to think how quickly that shift could happen. And now, as I said, looking forward to this year, on the 15th of November, we know that Putin is definitely going to be at the G20, along with China, India, Brazil, South Africa. And then probably supporting Brazil will be Argentina. Peru is not part of the G20, but in this type of alignment that I'm talking about, Peru produced the most amount of silver. So again, I come back to precious metals and precious black gold, namely oil. This is often what wars are fought after, and often what we see motivating the shift in the world power. The important point to keep in mind is that although the US economy is self-sufficient with respect to oil, they still are net importers, in the sense that they're service-orientated and consumer-driven economy. The US has very little manufacturing. Granted, that does have manufacturing, but very little, and often a lot of their manufacturing companies are controlled by Japan or China or outside conglomerates. And we'll come to how much of the globe China actually controls and what it's doing with American debt. At the moment, who controls the gold price? Because if China's stockpiling more gold than we know, if South Africa's sitting on gold, if India's sitting on gold, Russia's gold, we know for a few years now, the yuan or the renminbi has been used to trade in oil. So it's very interesting that China hasn't been worried about the petrodollar, if you like. They haven't brought all their commodities with the US dollar. And I can see that there's resistance to do so. And at the same token, some of their gold, they're quite happy to use to trade for oil, if not their own currency. And this will probably be the situation going forward. But the gold price, in my opinion, has been fairly suppressed. When it was in such a low yield environment, one would have expected the gold price to have run far higher. But the gold price is largely controlled by financial instruments. For every 1 ounce of actual gold that trades, close to 90 or 100 times that amount is traded either on the COMEX, the futures gold market, or the LMBA in London. Now the LMBA have a number of associations and members. I think there's about 74 associate members, 7 in Australia, 2 in South Africa, maybe 7 in China, 1 or 2 in India. But 32 members are from the UK. I think there's about 4 from the US, 7 or so from Australia. So largely London is controlling the price of gold. And we've seen some scandals come out with regard to the gold price being suppressed. So these are just things just to keep in mind in terms of what could play. If you've had a price of a commodity that's been artificially suppressed, and that commodity hasn't been recognized because it's not really playing an active role in currency. However, gold, silver, precious metals still remain money. They just are not current. They don't allow for easy transactions, easy movements, because actual ounces of gold are not trading. The price can be manipulated. Right from the start, the euro was doomed for failure as an alternative currency to the dollar. However, if a new currency is going to be introduced, and that currency is going to be the BRICS currency, you can be sure that there's discussions happening to make sure that the same mistake that happened with the euro isn't made again. That currency needs to be digital, and that currency needs to be backed by precious metal. So in the case of the pound, we often refer to it as the pound sterling, because originally it was backed by 1 pound of sterling silver. Obviously not today. And by the same token, if you look throughout history, for currency to really be called money, it needs to be backed by more than just a promise, more than just faith. So if you look on my Twitter bio, you'll see the word apistivist. Now, it's not a very well-known word, but very simply what it means is that I don't think that the basis for one's belief in something should be faith. I don't think faith has any substance to it. One needs evidence, something concrete. And by the same token, I don't think faith is a good reason for belief in a currency. Now, all of this discussion of Russia, China, India, South Africa, and remember, South African government, the ANC, is really having its strings pulled by the SACP, the South African Communist Party. This is a fact which we can discuss at a later stage. But this idea of communism is often something that the West is fearful of, that people that were brought up with a democratic capitalist society are concerned about. And there is valid reason for some concerns. You can be sure that individual wealth is still created under communism, but there we see monopolies and oligopolies and that type of structure, and the few of the very wealthy and elite that thrive in a communist society. Not everybody thrives. It's very much an old feudal system where there's the upper class elite, the politically connected, and the people below that. The irony is that most of us are quite happy to own American dollars, probably also happy to own euro, probably happy to own pound, but none of these currencies are backed by anything but faith. And so, if your currency was somehow linked to an international digital currency that's backed by gold, you could be in a far better situation in terms of potential downside. The other problem with gold is obviously it needs to be stored somewhere. Now, one place that it had been stored is in vaults in London. Another place is in Fort Knox in America. There are questions about how much gold is actually sitting in Fort Knox, how much belongs to other nations, and how much actually belongs to the US. But the point is, gold needs to be stored somewhere. So if it's stored in a country where China and Russia feel safe that it's not going to be used as a weapon against them by the United States, then certainly all that gold from Fort Knox needs to find its way out. I don't believe that the US are just going to give up that gold. Sometimes it takes a full year or so after a proper request for gold during times of peace for that gold to be released. Certainly not going to be released at the moment to Russia in the current situation. These are things that obviously China and Russia won't be very happy about. And if you think about it, why would you want to take gold out of the ground at a huge expense and put that gold bullion in Fort Knox or in London and then beg for that back? What actually set off this line of thinking as well was someone tweeted about the destruction of all of these buildings. I'm sure you've seen the video where China's supposedly blowing up buildings and they come piling down. I mean, why would that be true? We're getting fed a lot of propaganda that China is in extremely dire financial straits. Yet, only the Chinese economy has actually dropped interest rates. China at one stage, 5 years ago or so, controlled about 50% of American debt because America's created so much of their own debt that figures changed. The investments that China held were in the trillions. Now, very recently, they've dropped below holding a trillion in US dollar debt. So they're not interested in the US dollar or the US dollar debt, and that's got to be saying something. What are they expecting to happen to the dollar? Have they lost faith in the dollar? And if they have, what's the alternative? Furthermore, we know that the US has about 32%, and it might be slightly more. In fact, after COVID now, I'm sure it's substantially more debt that is owed to it on the continent of Africa, and about 12% of the debt on the continent of Africa is owed to China. Yet very recently, China has forgiven 17 countries from their debt obligations. If China was doing so badly, how can it be in a position to forgive these countries their debt obligations? Yet America hasn't done that, and we know they can't afford to. In fact, the whole purpose of America wanting war and getting involved in war efforts is because those countries, especially those with mineral wealth, then have a debt obligation. It gets paid back over decades and centuries to America. So while we're talking about a new currency being developed, I'm pretty certain this is going to be a digital currency. The various scenarios that play out is it can't be anything else that would work. That doesn't mean that the real, the rand, all the other currencies are going to disappear. They will still be there. But what will be quite interesting is think about how we saw a reaction to the likes of Bitcoin. It went up 23,000% in a small period of time. Now, if we have a digital currency that is backed by gold as well as by certain sovereign nations, we can see that currency outshining the dollar significantly, and something that would be in global demand, surely. And as a result, because gold is what's backing it, in dollar terms, with the devaluation of the dollar, talking about $10,000, which is only just over 6 times what the current gold price is certainly not unrealistic.